keeping it clinical and glossing over the gruesome parts. When she said simply, "I questioned him," Kevin would have a pretty clear picture of what that meant.
Hello there, and welcome
So what happened to your
this
face?
first hole, par
He was
4.
very flexible.
See what we can do out
and he
there.
had some kind of throwing blade in the lining of his sleeve.
That's rough.
He said gloomily, and she knew what he was thinking. Facial scars were bad news when you wanted to keep a low profile. They were too easy to remember and recognize. Suddenly, the search changed from, "Have you seen a short, nondescript female, unknown hair length or color, or a man fitting that same description?" to, "Have you seen a person with this scar?" "Well,"
Nice swing.
she concluded, "it appears the people in charge pegged you for the win. I won't pretend I'm not insulted. We'll have to tweak the plan. The bait has to come from you,
And we have
and it
about,
needs to go to the right person.
I'd say 140-ish
Do you have any idea who
yards
that would
from
be
here.
yet?" Kevin was quiet for a minute.
When word gets back to my guy about what happened tonight, well, we might not need the email. He's going to have to talk to your guy about this. I'm ready. I'll see them do it. Then we can decide if we need more.
"Sounds good,"
By the way,
he said in his covert voice.
I know you sanitized the story for the kid. I want the whole thing when I see you again.
She rolled her eyes. "Right."
Look, Ollie, don't let this go to your head, but you did good.
Solid
Real
swing.
Good. You saved Danny's life. Thank you.
She was so surprised, it took her a minute to respond. "I think we're quits.
Putting from around
Without
16
your
feet
dogs
out.
or your bat cave, we wouldn't have made it out, so thank you."
You could have taken off as soon as you saw that first newscast. You knew they thought you were dead, but you stayed to keep a virtual stranger safe. Though I'm sure you'd love nothing better than to be rid of both of us. That's honor right there. I owe you.
She said non-committally. They didn't need to discuss everything tonight.
Let me talk to him before you hang up,
Daniel whispered. "Daniel wants to talk."
Put him on.
She handed the phone over.
Kev, don't beat yourself up, Danny,
she heard Kevin tell him. She wondered if Daniel had been able to hear just as clearly.
Yeah,
Daniel responded, morose.
I'm only responsible for
Even
getting
par.
Arnie murdered
After
tonight.
the first hole.
Not to mention the dogs. Why should I suffer? Look,
And second
what's
hole
done is done.
coming up.
Funny, Alex said that too. Poison Girl knows the score. This is a new world, kid. It's got a higher body count. Now, I'm not saying that things like this won't affect you. You just can't let them cloud your vision.
Kevin's voice dropped into a lower register, and Alex was glad to know that Daniel probably hadn't been able to make out the quieter part of their conversation. But she also wanted to know what Kevin didn't want her to hear.
I think so,
Daniel said. A pause.
Maybe not. I will. Yes. Okay. What are you gonna do about the dogs? We had to leave Khan. Yeah.
Kevin's voice was back to normal volume.
I love that monster, but he's not exactly travel size, is he? There's a breeder not too far away that Arnie's worked with in the past. He's more a competitor than a friend, but he knows the value of my dogs. Arnie made a deal with him that if we ever wanted out, we'd sell him our stock. Arnie also sort of implied that we might decide to do that suddenly,
Nice.
without any warning and in the middle of the night.
Okay, we got about
I'll call him and he'll meet up with animal
to
control
go
before
here
they do
to the
anything
pin.
stupid. Won't the cops wonder? I'll coach him. He'll say Arnie called when he heard shots or something. Don't worry, the dogs will be okay.
Daniel sighed, relieved.
It does piss me off that he's getting his hands on Khan, free of charge. He's been trying to buy him for years. I'm sorry. Seriously, kid, don't sweat it. You don't last in this life by getting attached. I know how to start over. Now, be good
Solid
and
swing.
do whatever the oleander says, okay?
Wait, Kev. I had an idea. That's why I wanted to talk to you.
You've got an idea?
Alex could hear the skepticism from 3 feet away.
Yes, actually, I was thinking about the McKinley's cabin by the lake.
Kevin was silent for a second.
Now's not really the time for a trip down memory lane, kid. I'm actually 2 minutes older than you, kid, which I'm sure you haven't forgotten, and I don't want to reminisce. I was thinking that the McKinleys only ever used the cabin in the winter, and that your CIA people probably wouldn't know that much detail about our childhood, and that I know where Mr. McKinley always kept the key. Hey, that's not bad, Danny.
Okay, 11-footer here. This is
That'll be
definitely
about
makeable.
what? 18 hours from the ranch? Just 2 nights driving. And that'll bring you closer to my position. Didn't the McKinleys used to keep a Suburban out there? We can't steal their car, Kevin. In the darkness, though more than 1,000 miles apart, Alex felt like she was exchanging a loaded glance with Kevin. And maybe an eye roll, on his part at least. We'll talk about finding a car later. Tell the Oleander to take better care of her face next time. We're going to need it. Yes, because I'm sure she so enjoys having people beat it bloody that it will be hard for her to quit. Yeah. Call me if you have any troubles.
Okay.
I'll make
1 under for
contact
the
when I know
round.
more about our friends in Washington. Kevin disconnected. Daniel
Okay,
stared
nice
at the phone
fresh
for a
hole
minute
here.
before
Let's
putting
pop
it away.
this in the fairway.
He took a deep breath and let it out slowly. How are you holding up? She asked. Nothing feels real. Let me see your hand. He stretched his left arm out to her, and she took his hand with her right. His temperature was warmer than hers. She felt his wrist, and the pulse seemed even. The scratches and punctures on his palm were shallow. They'd already stopped bleeding on their own. She glanced over at him and then looked back to the road. It was too dark to be able to assess his coloring with any degree of certainty. What was that? He asked as she released his hand. Looking
Great
for signs
contact.
of shock.
Nice swing.
Do you feel nauseated? No, but then I kind of feel as if I should, if you know what I mean. Like, I will when I can process everything. Let me know if you start to feel dizzy, faint, or
135
cold.
yards or so to go.
You feel cold. Are you sure you're not going into shock? Not entirely, I suppose. If I feel dizzy, I'll pull over, and you can drive. He reached over, took her gloved hand off the wheel, and held it loosely, letting their arms dangle in the space between seats. He took another deep breath. I heard all those shots, so close together, and I thought, I know. Thanks for staying
Now
in the
that was a
car like I
swing.
asked. It's good to know I can trust you. He didn't say anything. What? She asked. Well, when you put it like that,
Okay,
he said,
we're about
sounding
17
ashamed.
feet out here.
I don't really want to admit this, but I did get out for a few minutes. I was about to go into the house, but Einstein stopped me. And then I realized that one way or another, things were decided inside. And if they had got you, my best bet to kill the bastards would be from the Humvee. I wasn't going to let them walk away, Alex. Not a chance. She squeezed his hand lightly. Do you remember what Kevin told me before? About visualization? She shook her head. It sounded only vaguely familiar. We were at the shooting range for the first time, and I said I didn't think I could shoot another person. He laughed, a dark little chuckle. He told me to visualize someone I cared about in
And that'll
danger.
keep you at 1 under for the round.
As he spoke, it came back clearly. Well,
All
I get
right,
it now.
let's let
He
her
was
rip.
right. The second I realized someone had killed Arnie and that he was coming for you next, he shook his head. I didn't realize I was capable of feeling so primal. I told you that you would get in touch with your instincts, she said lightly. The joking tone, recalled from that day at the range, felt all kinds of wrong the instant the words were out. Her voice was somber when she added, I wish it hadn't happened
That's
like
going to have
this.
to hit something.
He squeezed her hand this time. It's going to be okay. She made an effort
Nice.
to focus.
Way to stick the green.
So,
22
where exactly
feet
are we
from
headed?
the cup.
Tallahassee. We did a couple of Christmases there when we were kids. Some family friends kept a place there so they could get out of the snow. They must have liked their privacy because the cabin is in the middle of nowhere. It's not actually on the lake, but it's swampy, and the mosquitoes will be murder this time of year. You should be in real estate. You're sure no one will be there? I haven't seen the McKinleys since my parents' funeral, but they never went south in the summertime during all the years I knew them. It was always just their winter spot. Well, we might as well head that way as any other. If that cabin won't work, maybe we can find something else that's empty. She saw a sign for State
Awesome.
Highway 70 heading north. We'll have to turn east, go through
Sitting
Oklahoma
at
City,
2 under
then
for the
down through
round.
Dallas. It'll be good, if anyone's looking, to be
headed back into Texas.
Nice solid
Makes us
birdie on
look
that
innocent.
last hole. We got another
We
birdie in
only
the works
defended
here.
ourselves.
That won't matter. If we got picked up for what just happened, the police would have to take us in. Even if we explained every detail and they believed every word, which is unlikely, to put it mildly, they'd still have to put us in a cell for a while. It wouldn't take long. The people who hired the hitmen would have no trouble getting to us in jail. We'd be sitting ducks. He felt the tremble in her fingers and rubbed his thumb soothingly across the back of her hand. So, you're saying a crime spree is a bad idea right now? She couldn't believe he was the one trying to cheer her up. Probably, she agreed. But it might come to that. She glanced down at the gas gauge, then hissed.
Looks like you
This
may be
thing is
getting
burning
wet
through
here.
gas like it wants to piss me off.
What can we do?
I'm going to have to go into a gas station, pay with cash.
But your face.
There's no help for it. I'll just pretend I was in a car accident, which actually is not pretend at all, is it? Anyway, there's nothing else I can do. The gas-guzzling monster forced Alex to stop much earlier than she would have liked. She followed the signs in Oklahoma City to the airport, guessing that the gas stations around it would be somewhat busy even late at night. Also, if anyone noticed them here, he might assume they were planning to fly out. Any ensuing search would be concentrated on the airport. She'd had Daniel find her oversized hoodie while she was driving. She slipped into it now, wishing it were cooler out so that she would look more normal. There were 2 other vehicles, one taxi and one work truck. Both male drivers eyed the Humvee, of course. She moved in her boy slouch as she got out and stuck the nozzle into the tank. While it was filling, she slouched her way into the store. She grabbed a box of granola bars and a 6-pack of bottled water and took them to the 50-something woman at the counter. The woman had bleached blonde hair with an inch of dark roots, nicotine-stained teeth, and a name tag that said Beverly. At first, she didn't pay
Great
much attention to
contact.
Alex, just rang up the goods. But then Alex had to speak. "Pump 6, she said, in the lowest register that wouldn't sound put
Back
on.
on the fairway. This is where I
Beverly
like to
looked
be.
up, and her
about
mascara-smeared eyes opened
135
round.
yards out from here.
Aw, sweet hell, honey. What happened to your face?
Car accident, Alex muttered.
Everyone okay?
Yeah. Alex looked pointedly down at the cash in her hand, waiting to count it out. From the corner of her eye, she saw the taxi drive away.
Well, I hope you feel better soon.
Thanks. What's the total?
Oh, is this right? Seems high. 103.55?
Alex handed Beverly 6 20s and waited for the change. Another truck, a big black F-250, pulled into the pump behind the Humvee. She watched
that'll
as
keep
3
you
tall,
at 2
thin
under for the
men got
round.
out. As 2 of them walked into the mini-mart, she revised her assessment.
Okay.
They were very
here
tall,
we go.
teenage boys, half of a basketball team maybe. Like her, they wore dark hoodies. At least that made her unseasonable getup look more normal.
That sure is a big truck you got out there.
Beverly commented. Yeah,
Must be a pain to keep that thing full.
yeah. Alex held her hand out impatiently. The boys came in, noisy and boisterous. The smell of beer and marijuana drifted in through the door with them. Outside, the work truck pulled out of the lot.
Oh, here you go.
Beverly said, her voice suddenly impersonal.
16.45.
Thanks. Beverly was distracted by the newcomers. She stared over Alex's head, her eyes narrowed. The big boys were headed for the liquor aisle. Hopefully they would be a huge pain as they tried to get fake IDs past Beverly. Anything that would make Alex fade in her memory. Alex headed for the automatic door with her head down. She didn't need more than one witness. With a thud, her head knocked into the chest of the third boy. The first thing she registered was the smell. His sweatshirt reeked of whiskey. She looked up automatically when
Nice.
he grabbed her by the shoulders.
Watch yourself, little player.
He was a thick white kid, not as tall as the others. She tried to shake him off. He held on tighter with
This one's
one
for
hand,
Birdie.
yanking her hood back with the other.
Hey, it's a girl.
Then louder toward the boys by the refrigerated cases.
Looky what I found.
Alex's voice was ice. She was not in the mood for this nonsense. Get your hands off me.
You leave that gal alone or I'm calling the police,
Beverly called shrilly.
I've got the phone in my hand.
Alex wanted to scream. This was all she needed.
Relax, old bag. We got plenty to go around.
The other two, one black, one Hispanic, were already in place to back their friend up. Alex slid a thin syringe from her belt. This wouldn't help her stay under the radar, but she had to put this kid down and get out of here before Beverly called the cops.
So that's going to keep you at 2 under
I've
for the
dialed the
round.
9 and the first one.
Beverly warned them.
7th
You all
hole
get
coming
out
up.
now.
Alex tried to yank herself out of the boy's grip, but the grinning idiot had both hands locked around her upper arms now. She angled the needle.
Is there a problem, son?
No, Alex moaned internally.
What?
The white kid said aggressively, dropping her and pivoting to face the newcomer. He then took a quick step back, and she had to duck out of his way. She'd spent so much time around Daniel that she'd forgotten how tall he really was. He had an inch on even the tallest kid, and he stood with wider shoulders and
This one's
much
a
more
beauty.
assurance. At least he'd put a ball cap on, hiding his hair and shading his face a little. The
And
beginnings of
you're
his
on the
beard
green
were dark
with
enough to slightly
a whole lot of work to
camouflage
do
the
for the next
contours of
shot.
his face. That was good. But it was not good that he'd stuck a Glock, in a very obvious way, into the waistband of his jeans.
No problem, man.
The black kid said. He grabbed the white kid's shoulder and tugged him back a step.
Good. Why don't you head on out, then?
The white kid thrust his chest forward.
When we get what we came for.
Daniel did something different with the way he held his jaw. Alex couldn't quite put her finger on it, but suddenly his face was the opposite of friendly. He leaned in toward the troublemaker.
Now.
There was no bluster in how he spoke, just absolute authority.
Come on.
The black kid insisted.
And that'll
He
keep
shoved
you
the
at
white
2
kid
under
past
for the
Daniel,
round.
while tugging on the sleeve of the third boy. They walked quickly to the truck,
Coming off
elbowing
a
each
par
other
on the
and
last
scuffling
one.
a
Let's see
little.
what happens here.
Alex kept her back to Beverly, nudging Daniel so he would turn that way too. The boys got in the truck and the driver punched the gas, swerving around the Humvee with tires squealing.
Hey, thanks, buddy.
Beverly cooed at him.
I appreciate your help.
Sure thing, he responded, holding one arm out courteously for Alex to exit first. Alex hurried back to the Humvee. She could feel Daniel close behind her and just hoped he had the sense to keep his head down and not turn around. Well, I don't know how that could have gone worse, Alex said
Solid
disgustedly
swing.
when they were back on the road. That woman will remember us for the rest of her natural life.
Sorry.
You just had to go in there like some cowboy with a gun in your pants.
We do
So
have
we
Texas
have about
plates.
165
he
yards
pointed
to
out.
go still.
And what was I supposed to do? That kid was about to have a violent and prolonged episode of projectile vomiting. It would have incapacitated him totally and perhaps made enough of a mess that Beverly would have forgotten all about me.
Oh.
Yeah. Oh, indeed. I can take care of myself, Daniel. His jaw suddenly got hard again, like it had in the gas station store.
I know that, Alex, but there might actually come a time when you need help. When that happens, I'm not going to be waiting in the car again. You should probably wrap your head around that now.
Great contact.
I'll
Nice
tell you
swing.
when I need backup.
And I'll be there.
He snapped. She let the quarrel drop, and for a moment there was no sound but the roar of the oversized engine burning through the new gas. Then he sighed.
I should have known you were one step ahead.
He said. She nodded her acceptance of the implied apology, though she had mixed feelings about his declarations. Where did you learn how to do that? She asked after another short lull.
What?
Intimidate people.
My school isn't exactly an exclusive private prep. Anyway, most kids just want someone to take control. It makes them feel more secure.
She laughed. Then those boys will sleep sound tonight. The rest of the night was less fraught. Daniel dozed against the window, snoring lightly, until the next gas stop, about 20 miles east of Dallas. The sleepy man in the booth showed no interest in Alex's face. When they were away from the gas station's
Okay,
cameras,
so that's
she
gonna
pulled
keep you
off on
at
a dark
2 under
shoulder
for the
and
round.
traded seats with Daniel. He claimed to be wide awake and ready.
Okay, it's
She
time to
napped as
send this
best she
ball on
could
its
until the
way.
next stop, south of Shreveport, where they switched seats again. Dawn was coming. Alex searched the fancy GPS for a close-by national park or wildlife reserve and found they were not far from the huge expanse of the Kisatchie National Forest. She headed for the corner of the park that came closest to the I-49, then wandered through back roads until she found an area isolated and overgrown enough that she felt comfortable pulling over into the thick shade of some tightly grouped trees. She backed into a barely wide enough space between the tree trunks and then reversed until there was just room for the rear hatch to open. When she cracked her door, the humid heat outside quickly overpowered the cooler air inside the vehicle. Einstein was thrilled to get out of the car and relieve himself. It was harder for Lola. Alex had to redress Lola's wound when she was done. Daniel had food and water out for them before Alex was finished. Then Daniel had the easier job of relieving himself, and Alex got the more complicated version. She'd lived out of a car before, though, and while it wasn't her favorite thing, she was prepared. She took a look at the front of the Humvee and had to admit she was impressed. To the naked eye, there was no evidence that they'd been in even a minor fender bender. The breakfast options were minimal. Alex found herself with the same box of Pop-Tarts that she'd started with her first morning at the ranch. Daniel took a packet, too.
What are we going to do about food?
He asked. Alex wiped her arm across her forehead,
Looks like this may be
drying
in
the
the deep
sweat
stuff.
before it could drip into her eyes. Tonight, I'll stock up a little at each gas station. It will get us through a few days. Let me know if you have any requests. Alex yawned, then hissed when the motion pulled at the cut on her face.
Do you have aspirin?
She nodded, tiredly. That might be a good idea. We both need to get some sleep. The dogs will be fine if we just leave them outside, right? I don't want them to have to be cooped up all night and all day, too. Alex dug up a couple of Motrin, while Daniel shoved the mess in the back of the Humvee to the sides of the bed, leaving a narrow, flat space in the middle for them. Satisfied that she'd done everything she could, Alex spread out her sleeping bag and rolled down the top edge for a pillow. It felt normal in an abnormal way to have Daniel lie down beside her, instinctive and comfortable for him to wrap one arm around her waist and bury his face in the hollow of her neck. The scratch of his short beard tickled her skin, but she didn't mind. She was starting to drift off when she became conscious of his movement beside her. At first, she thought he was beginning to snore, but the shuddering didn't pause. She grabbed his fingers at her waist and found them trembling. She jerked up and twisted to face him. His eyes flew wide when she moved so suddenly, and he started to sit up. She pushed him down with one hand on his chest.
What's wrong?
Very solid
He
round
whispered.
after 9. Looking fantastic.
She looked at his face. It was hard to tell in the shade,
Let's put
but
this
he looked
drive in the
paler than
fairway.
before. She should have been watching for this. Now that they had the chance to figuratively lay their weapons down for a moment, of course the severe strain of the night before would catch up to them. Probably not authentic shock, more likely just a traditional panic attack. Nothing, except maybe with you. She touched his forehead. It felt clammy. Do you feel sick?
No, I'm fine.
You were shaking. He shook his head and took a deep breath.
Sorry. I was just thinking about how close it was.
Don't. It's over. You're safe.
I know.
I won't let anything happen to you. He laughed once, and she could hear the same sound of hysteria that had been in her own laugh last night.
I know,
He repeated.
I'll be fine. But what about you? Are you safe?
He pulled her
Sweet.
down onto his
All
chest,
right,
cradling the
we're right
damaged
around
side of her face
165 yards
carefully
out.
in his long fingers, and whispered into her hair.
I could have lost you. Just like that. Everything that means anything to me is gone. I've lost my home, my job, my life. I've lost myself. I'm hanging on by my fingernails, Alex. And it's you I'm hanging on to. If something happens to you, I don't know what that means for me. I don't know how I keep going. I'm dealing with the rest, Alex, but I can't lose you too. I can't.
Another shudder ran through his body. It's okay, she murmured uncertainly, reaching up to rest her fingers against his lips. I'm here. Was that the right thing to say? She didn't have any experience comforting someone. Even when her mother had been in the last stages of the illness that had killed her, Judy didn't want sympathy, and she didn't want lies. If Juliana were to say something like, "You look great today, Mom," Judy's response was always along the lines of, "Don't bother with that nonsense. I have a mirror." It never
Well, you're on the green,
seemed to
and
occur to
that's
Judy
decent.
that
Okay,
Juliana might need
11-footer
comfort.
here. This is definitely
After
makeable.
all, Juliana wasn't the one who was dying. She'd learned early not to seek sympathy for herself. She'd never really known how to show it to someone else. She would be more comfortable with the clinical, explaining that what he was feeling now was just a natural response to the specter of a violent death. But she'd said things like that to him before, and she knew they didn't help. So she found herself mimicking things
Solid
she'd
putt.
seen
We're in
on
the hole.
television, speaking softly, stroking the side of
And
his
that'll
face.
keep you at 1 under for the
We're okay.
round.
It's over. She wondered if she should put the sleeping bag over him,
And
just
we
in case,
are teeing off.
though it was already sweltering and he
What is
didn't
this?
feel cold.
This is number
Still,
11.
she'd already come to the conclusion that he ran at a warmer temperature than she did, both physically and metaphorically. His breathing still sounded rough. She pulled her head free and then propped herself up so she could examine his face. He was no longer just pale. His soft eyes were haunted, tormented, his jaw tight against the panic he was trying to control. A raised line pulsed in his forehead. He stared at her like he was pleading for a release from pain. His expression ignited a nightmare of a memory, the memory of his interrogation, and she impulsively threw her arms around his neck, pulling his head up off the floor of the Humvee and hugging it tight to her chest to hide that
Nice
face.
swing.
She felt her own convulsive shiver, and the clinical side of her brain let her know that she was every bit as traumatized as he was. Her non-clinical side didn't care what the
you were
reason was.
about
A wave of
150
panic was
yards
washing through
from the
her,
pin, I'd say.
and she felt as if she couldn't hold him close enough to reassure herself that he was actually alive and safe and here. As if she might suddenly blink and be back inside her black tent with Daniel screaming in agony, or worse, she would open her eyes to the dark upstairs hallway only to find Daniel's bleeding body at her feet instead of the hitman's. Her pulse spiked, and she couldn't breathe. Daniel rolled their bodies so he was at her side, and his hands peeled hers free from his head. For a second, she thought he was about to take the comforter's role, at which she had failed so spectacularly. But then their eyes met, and she was looking into a mirror of all the turmoil and fear in her own head. Fear of loss. Fear of having,
Could be in the
because
rough
that
here.
made the loss possible. Rather than comfort, the depth of his fear multiplied hers. She could lose him, and she didn't know how to live with that. Chapter 21. Their lips crushed together so suddenly, she wasn't sure who had moved first. And then their bodies were tangling together with a kind of desperate fury, lips and fingers, tongues and teeth. Breathing was secondary, and she managed it only in broken pants that left her still dizzy. She wanted nothing but to be closer, and then closer, to be inside his skin somehow, so that he could never be ripped away from her. She felt the scald as the wound along her jaw reopened, and all the bruises, old and new, flared to life, but the pain did nothing to distract from that acute need. They grappled almost like adversaries, turning and twisting together in the limits of the small space, slamming against the duffel bags, and then back to the floor. She was amazed at how electrifying his brute strength was. Strength in a man had always been something to fear, but now she thrilled to it. Fabric tore, and she couldn't guess who it belonged to. She remembered the texture of his skin, the shape of his muscles under her hands, but she had not imagined they could feel like this against her own. Closer, her blood pulsed. closer. And then he suddenly jerked away, his mouth sliding from hers with a choked gasp. An anxious whine sounded at her feet. She leaned over and saw Einstein with his jaws locked on Daniel's ankle. Einstein whimpered again.
Einstein, at ease,
he growled, kicking to free his foot.
Get off!
Einstein let him go,
And that'll
looking
keep you
to
at
her
1 under for the
nervously.
round.
At ease. Her voice was husky. It's okay.
Okay,
With a hesitant
and we
huff,
find ourselves
Einstein
now
dropped
in the
out of the
12th hole.
open
Let's see what
hatch.
you can do.
Daniel rolled up and slammed the door shut. He turned toward her on his knees, his pupils dilated and his eyes wild. He gritted his teeth as if he were fighting for some kind of control. She reached up for him, her fingers stretching to hook into the waistband of his jeans, and he collapsed into her with a low groan.
Alex, Alex,
he breathed against her neck.
Stay with me. Don't leave.
Even in the frenzy of the moment, she was aware what he was asking, and she meant what she said when she answered, knowing it could be the worst kind of mistake. I will, she promised roughly. I won't. Their mouths locked together again, and she could feel his heart drumming a syncopated rhythm against her own, aligned beneath their skin, because his mirrored hers. The shrill peal of the phone pierced through the lower register sounds, the double heartbeat,
I'd say it
the
looks like
gasping
around
breaths,
145
and had her
yards
pushing
for the
away from
pin.
him in a different kind of panic. He shook his head quickly once, eyes closed, as if trying to remember where he was. She sat up, looking for the source of the sound.
I've got it,
Daniel said, gasping. He shoved his hand in his jeans pocket as the phone pealed again. He looked at the number, then hit answer with his thumb. With his left hand, he pulled her back against his chest.
Kev?
Daniel answered between pants.
Danny, hey, you guys safe? Yeah. What are you doing? Trying to get some sleep. Sounds like you're running a marathon.
The phone scared me. Nerves a little frayed, you know? He lied so smoothly that she almost smiled in spite of the
Solid
tumult
swing.
inside her.
Oh, right. Sorry. Let me talk to Oleander. You mean Alex? Whatever. Give her the phone.
She tried to slow her breathing to sound normal. Yes?
What?
All right,
Don't
we're
tell
in
me the phone
first
scared
cat
you,
here.
too.
Let's just pop this on
I am
the
not a
green.
Black Ops agent, and it's been a very long night.
I'll keep it quick. I found my guy. Does the name Devers mean anything to you?
She thought for a second, working to pull her mind back to the things that mattered. Yes, I know the name. It was on some of the files when information was being extracted for the CIA. He never came in to monitor an interrogation, though. Is he a supervisor over there?
He's more than a supervisor. He's second in command these days, with an eye to moving up. He was one of several potentials I was monitoring. Early this morning, Devers gets a call, punches a few walls, then makes his own call. I know this guy. He loves to make the peons scurry.
9-footer
He
here.
doesn't leave
See
his
what we can do.
office. He sends an aide to bring the person he wants to him. Always the power play. But after that second call, he goes running out to see your man Karsten like a gopher. They met up at a random little residential park miles away from both their offices, and then went for a leisurely and sweaty walk, looking like they wanted to murder each other the whole time. It's Devers, for sure.
What
There's
are you
a
thinking?
nice putt for you.
I think I still want the email. I need to see
And
who
that'll
else
keep
knows
you
about
at
this.
1 under for the
Taking
round.
out Devers won't be too hard, but it just tips the other guys off if he's not alone. Have you got
Coming
a pen?
off a par on
Give
the
me a
last
sec.
one. Let's see what happens
She crawled
here.
to the front seat and located her backpack. She dug for a pen, then scribbled the email address he gave her onto the back of a gas receipt. When? She asked.
Tonight,
He decided.
after you've gotten some sleep and have your nerve back.
I'll send it from Baton Rouge. Do you have a script, or do you want me to wing it?
You know the gist. Don't make it sound too cerebral.
I think I could channel some caveman.
Perfect. Once you trade cards with the McKinleys, start heading up here.
He switched to his library voice, but Daniel was so close it was a wasted effort.
Danny gonna give you trouble about staying behind?
She tilted her face up toward Daniel's. It was easy to read his reaction. Yeah, I'm
Nice.
not so sure it's a good idea anyway. Call me paranoid, but I don't believe in safe houses anymore. Daniel bent down to press his lips hard against her forehead, which made it difficult to pay attention to what Kevin was saying.
Figure a place for Lola. How bad is your face? Oleander?
Huh?
Your face. What does it look like?
Big bandage across my left jaw and ear. As she spoke, Daniel leaned closer to examine her wounds and then drew in a sharp breath. Plus all the original fun.
That could play, Kevin said. Lola's injured too. I'll feed them a story that will keep them satisfied.
Who?
The dog boarding place for Lola. Damn, Ollie, you need some sleep.
Heading
You're getting
towards
dumber by
the
the
beach
second.
here. Not the good
Maybe
kind.
I'll write your email now, while I'm in the right frame of mind.
Call me when you're on the road again.
Kevin hung up.
You're bleeding through the bandage.
Daniel said anxiously. She handed him the phone. It's fine. I should have glued it last night.
Let's take care of it now.
She looked up at his face. The panic and ferocity in his eyes had dimmed to simple concern. His chest was still slick with sweat, but his breathing was regular. She wasn't sure she had reached a similar state of calm. Right now? She asked. He gave her a measured look.
Well, at least you're on the green.
Yes,
That is always
right
good.
now.
And this one to say
Is it
par.
bleeding that much? She touched the gauze gingerly, but felt only a bit of warm wet. From his expression, she'd expected blood to be gushing out in a torrent.
It's bleeding. That's enough. Where's the first aid kit?
With a sigh, she turned to the piled duffels. The wrong one was on top, so she had to readjust. While she dug, she felt his fingers cautiously brushing along her left shoulder blade.
You're all over bruises,
He murmured. His fingers followed the line of her arm.
These look fresh.
I got tackled, she admitted as she pulled out the kit and turned around.
You never told me what happened in the house,
He commented.
And that
You don't wanna
hole
know.
puts you up
Maybe I
to
do.
even par.
Okay, I don't want you to know. Daniel
Coming
took the
off
first
a
aid kit
bit of
from
a
her hands
bogey on that
and then
last
crossed
hole.
his
Let's see if we
legs
can
and
do
set
better
it between
here.
them. She followed suit with a heavy sigh, angling the left side of her face toward him. Gently, he started easing the tape from her skin. You can do that faster, she told him.
I'll do it my way.
They sat in silence for a moment while he worked. The stillness allowed her body to remind her how exhausted she was.
Why don't you want me to know?
He asked, as he dabbed a medicated wipe against her skin.
Do you think I can't handle it?
No, I just...
What?
The way you look at me now, I don't want that to change. From the corner of her eye, she saw him smile.
You don't have to worry about that.
She shrugged in response.
How do I do this?
He asked, pulling her superglue from the case. Push the edges of the cut together, draw a line of glue across the top, then hold it till the glue dries. About a minute. She suppressed a wince as he pressed his fingertips firmly against her skin. The familiar smell of the adhesive filled the space between them.
Does this hurt?
It's fine.
Do you ever get tired of being tough?
She rolled her eyes. The pain is manageable, thank you. He leaned away to examine his work.
It looks messy,
He told her.
You should have saved the life of an EMT.
She took the glue from him and screwed the cap back on. She didn't want it to
And
dry
that'll
out.
keep you
Who knew how
at
soon
even
she might
par.
need it
Nice.
again, the way this trip was going. I'm sure it will do the
All
job,
right, next
she
stop.
said.
Let's hope for
Hold
some
it for a
fairway.
little longer.
Alex, I'm sorry about just now.
His voice was quiet, apologetic. She wished she could turn her head and look at him straight on.
I don't know what that was.
He continued.
I can't believe I was so rough with you.
I wasn't exactly pulling my punches.
But I'm not injured.
He reminded her sourly.
Not a scratch on me, as you put it.
I don't think that's entirely true anymore, she told him, brushing her fingers against the skin of his chest. She could feel the faint welts her nails had left. He inhaled sharply, both of them caught for 1 second in the memory, and her stomach contracted. She tried to turn her head, but he held her face still.
Wait,
He cautioned. They sat motionless in the charged silence while she counted to 60 in her head twice. It's dry, she insisted. Slowly, he lifted his fingers from her jaw. She turned to him, but his face was down as he searched the kit. He found the antibacterial spray and applied it liberally to her wound. Then he pulled out the roll of gauze and tape. Gently, and without looking her in the eye, he took her chin between his thumb and forefinger and repositioned her head. He taped the gauze in place.
we should sleep now.
He said, as he pressed the last piece tight to her skin.
We're both overwrought and not thinking clearly. We can reopen this discussion when we're rational.
She wanted to argue, but she knew he was right. They weren't acting like themselves. They were acting like animals, responding to a near-death experience with a subconscious imperative to continue the species. It was primitive biology rather than responsible adult behavior. She still wanted to argue. His fingers rested against the side of her neck, and she could feel her pulse begin to jump under his touch. He could too. "Sleep," he repeated. You're right.
Now that
She
was
grumbled,
a swing.
flopping back against the rumpled sleeping bag. She really was bone-weary. "Here." He handed her his t-shirt. "Where's mine?" "In pieces. Sorry." It was already too warm and stuffy inside the Humvee. She tossed his shirt aside and grinned remorsefully, feeling the glue pull. For people with quite limited resources, we are not being very careful with our things. He must have noticed the lack of air circulation as well. He leaned over and opened the back hatch again. "Like I said, we're overwrought." He lay down next to her, and she curled into his chest, wondering
Okay,
if it
so
would
you're in
really
the
be
rough here.
possible to sleep
Not
with
gonna
him
lie.
half naked beside her. She closed her eyes, trying to will herself into unconsciousness. His arms wrapped around her, tentatively at first, and then, after a few seconds, more securely, almost like he was testing his resolve. If she'd been any less tired, she might have made the test harder for him. But despite her heightened awareness of his body and all the little volts of electricity that sparked where her
Looks
nerve
like you're
endings
gonna
met
hit
his
some
bare
sand
skin,
here.
she quickly drifted. As she surrendered to oblivion, one strange word circled through her head. Mine, her brain insisted, as her thoughts faded to black. Mine. When Alex woke, the sun was still bright in the west, and the sleeping bag underneath
Well, you
her
out of
was
the
damp
sand.
with sweat.
That's all.
The
That's all
shadows
you can
had
ask for.
shifted, and a shaft of light was hitting her full in the face, albeit through the tinted window. She blinked sleepily for a minute, waiting for her brain to wake up. Then she came to with a jolt as she realized she was alone. She sat up too quickly, making her head ache and spin. The back hatch of the Humvee was still open, and the warm, humid air sat heavily on her skin. Daniel was nowhere in sight. Neither was his t-shirt, so she had to swiftly and silently dig into her things to find something to wear before she could look for him. It was stupid, but if she was about to run into another team of assassins, she didn't want to do it in no
3
more than a
over for the
worn tan
round.
bra. She threw on her thin, oversized gray sweater because it was the first thing her fingers
16th
touched,
hole coming up
not
here.
because it was
Let us
weather
see what you
appropriate.
can do.
She pulled the PPK out of her bag and tucked it into the small of her back. As she was climbing out the open hatch, she heard the crinkle of paper under her knee. It was the receipt she'd written the email address on. Underneath that was another neatly printed note. Taking Einstein for a walk. Back soon. She shoved the note in her pocket. Still moving quietly, she climbed out of the Humvee. Lola was sprawled out in a patch of shade beside the water and food Daniel had left. Her tail started thumping against the grass when she saw Alex. Well, at least with Lola there,
Great
Alex
contact.
knew
Nice
that there
swing.
was no one else around. Alex gulped down some water, wiped the sweat from her face with the sleeves of the sweater, then shoved them up as high as they could go.
This looks like
I don't even know which direction they
I'd say
went,
around
she
110
complained to
yards
Lola,
or so to the
scratching
pin.
her ears. And you're in no shape to track them down, are you, girl? Though I bet you could pretty fast, if you were on your feet. Lola licked her hand. Alex was very hungry. She explored the small stash of food Daniel had brought and settled for a bag of pretzels. She would definitely need to replenish their stores tonight, but she so hated leaving a trail. Of course, there were hundreds of possible routes they could have taken to any number of destinations. But if someone were persistent enough and had a little luck on his side, he might be able to put together a pattern. She was out of carefully prepared traps and well-thought-out plans, let alone bat caves. Her assets were money,
Sitting at
guns,
2
ammo,
over for the
grenades,
round.
knives, a variety of venoms and chemical incapacitators, an assault
All
vehicle,
right,
and one
let's let her
brilliant
rip.
attack dog. Her physical liabilities included that same attention-demanding assault vehicle, one lame dog, her own somewhat lame body, one conspicuous face, one face off a wanted poster, more or less, and a lack of food, shelter, and options. Her emotional liabilities were even worse. She couldn't believe how much trouble she'd brought on herself in such a
Heading
limited
for
time.
the green here.
Part of her wanted nothing more than to rewind, to go back to her cozy little bathtub, her unbroken face, and her safety nets. To choose
For the
differently in
birdie
that
here.
distant library and delete the email. But if she could turn back the clock, would she? Was that life of daily terror and loneliness really such a better option? She'd been safer, yes, but still hunted. In so many ways, wasn't her new, more endangered life a fuller existence? She was sitting next to Lola, slowly stroking her back, when she heard Daniel's voice approaching. After the first shock of alarm, she didn't panic that he was talking to someone else. There was a special edge in his voice that appeared only when he was speaking with Kevin. Einstein arrived first. He ran excitedly to Alex and touched his wet nose to her hand. He exchanged a snuffly greeting with Lola, then went to get a drink. Daniel walked into view, striding quickly down the center of the
And that'll
unkempt
keep
dirt
you
road.
at
He
2
had a hat
over
on.
for the round.
Beneath it, his brows were furrowed. He held the phone half an inch from
Coming
his
off
ear.
a par on the last
"I'm
one.
back
Let's
now,"
see what happens
he
here.
was saying. "I'll see if she's awake." "No, I will not wake her if she's still sleeping." Alex got to her feet, brushing debris from her backside and stretching. The movement caught Daniel's eye, and his expression shifted from annoyance to a slow, wide smile. Though she was a little exasperated, she couldn't help grinning back. "She's right here. Just one more second of patience, brother dear." Rather than hand her the phone, Daniel pulled her close for a lingering hug. With her face hidden in his chest, breathing in his smell, she smiled. But when he finally leaned away, she was shaking her head,
I can't
her
hit all the
eyebrows
fairways.
raised in disbelief. "Sorry," he said. "Wasn't thinking." She blew out a frustrated breath, then held her hand out for the phone. He gave it to her with a sheepish grin, his other arm still loosely around her. "Don't mind me. I'm just trying to keep us alive," she muttered, then spoke into the phone. "Hello." "Good morning. I see my idiot brother hasn't learned anything from his mistakes." "What's happened?" "Not much. A flurry of phone calls, but no one else has implicated himself at this point." "Then why are you calling?" "Because it feels like you and Daniel have an infinite capacity to screw things up. It's making me a nervous wreck." "Well, it's been lovely chatting." "Don't get mad,
Solid
Oleander.
swing.
You know I mean Daniel. I just wish you could somehow put a leash on him." "He's new. He'll get it." "Before he kills himself?" "You know I can hear you, right?" Daniel asked. "No one likes an eavesdropper," Kevin said loudly. "Give the girl some space." "Here, just talk to him yourself. I'm going to sort our things out so we'll be ready to go when the sun sets." She handed the phone back to Daniel and freed herself. He didn't stay on much longer with his brother. They just exchanged a few insults while she walked back to the Humvee and surveyed the damage. The cargo hold was still total chaos. Well, she had plenty of time on her hands now and not much else productive to do. She pulled the PPK from the small of her
And
back
ending things
and put it
off.
away